Hey everyone, Kavemi here with another Reddit story. Today's is a chilling, tense story about a family curse that turns out to be something far more sinister. It's a tale of a woman who uncovers a horrifying secret, fights back against a powerful enemy, and finds the courage to live a life free of fear. Settle in, enjoy the Minecraft in the background, and let's get into it. The title is, My Family's Curse Was Just a Story, until a man came asking for my mother on my 27th birthday. What he whispered next made my blood run cold. My whole body tightened up. Every generation in my family loses someone on their 27th birthday. First, it was my great-grandfather, then my grandmother's sister, and finally my mother's cousin. I'm not superstitious, but no one gave a good explanation. 4 months later, while I was walking to work, a car jumped the curb just where I was standing seconds before. That night at 3:00 a.m, I couldn't sleep and Googled my family history, discovering 7 deaths, all occurring at the age of 27. I went to see my great-aunt Agnes, the only person alive who remembered the elder ones. But as I mentioned the fatalities, her expression froze. "Why are you looking into this?" she questioned, not looking at me. I told her my birthday was approaching, and she finally turned around, her face pallid. "They all died between 4 and 5 in the afternoon," she said quietly. "We stopped having birthday parties because of it." She didn't say anything else. When the time arrived, I informed everyone I wanted to be alone and deadbolted the door. On the morning of my 27th birthday, I sat on my couch and watched the clock. 11 a.m. passed, then 1 p.m. At 3:30 I was starting to relax, wondering whether I was being stupid. At 3:47 someone knocked on my door. I assumed it was UPS with a package, so I glanced through the peephole. "Who is it?" I called through the door. "I'm looking for Isabel," he continued, his voice cold and impersonal. "Wrong apartment," I said. "There's no Isabel here." I began to back away from the door, but he knocked again, louder. "Please, I know she's in there. I need to speak with Isabel." My palms were sweating as I fastened the chain and opened the door, just slightly. When he saw me, his jaw dropped. "Your eyes," he whispered, moving closer. "You have Isabel's eyes." His right hand was in his coat pocket, and I could see its silhouette through the fabric. "You're going to tell me where Isabel is," the man said. I slammed the door so fiercely that the walls trembled. Boom, boom, boom. He began beating his fist against the door. "I know you are in there, I can wait. You've got to come out eventually." I called 911, barely able to keep my phone straight, and informed them that someone was attempting to break in. Another slam and the chain lock pulled partially off of the frame, sending screws clattering to the floor. The beating continued while I spoke with the dispatcher, but once we both heard sirens approaching, it stopped. Complete silence. The cops discovered nothing. No fingerprints on the door, and none of my neighbours noticed anyone in the corridor. They looked at me as if I were having a breakdown. I spent the remainder of my birthday in that barricaded apartment, jumping at every sound. But nothing else occurred. I survived up until my sister's 27th birthday. I thought I had broken whatever sick trend this was. I stopped taking medication after that, assuming it was the reason I'd been so paranoid over nothing. When my sister and I were preparing her birthday party, I told her about my incident, and we both chuckled at how insane I had been. I was in a conference when my mother called. I finally came out to respond, and she was sobbing so hard that I couldn't understand her. "Can you hear me, Mum? Your sister has collapsed at work." It turns out she had a brain aneurysm. They pronounced her deceased at 4:27 p.m. She celebrated her 27th birthday. During the funeral, none of my relatives looked me in the eye. My aunt grabbed me aside and told me that my sister had mentioned receiving strange emails the week before. Someone asking for someone named Isabel, but she thought they were spam and deleted them. I knew immediately that it was meant to be me. Fast forward 2 years to her 28th birthday. I was alone in the cemetery at 4:27 p.m. I heard footsteps behind me. "You're the one who survived," the woman replied. She knew everything, including the man at my door and Isabel. When she finally described what was going on, everything made sense. She removed an old photograph from her pocket and handed it to me. And there was my mother, younger with darker hair, standing next to this woman. Isabel and Margot 2003 was written on the back in faded blue ink. My legs felt wobbly as she said that Isabel was my mother's real name before she changed it 24 years ago. She had been fleeing from someone dangerous, someone who wanted her dead for what she had done to him. The curse was not a family secret or ill luck. It was a man who had been after our family for decades. He was killing us at the age of 27, which is exactly when my mother fled and began her new life. My stomach churned as the pieces came into place. My sister died for something that happened before we were born. The woman introduced herself as Margot Keller and claimed to have been my mother's greatest friend at the time, helping her disappear. She helped construct all of the bogus paperwork, found her a new location to live in, and taught her how to entirely transform into someone else. Margot pointed to the graves around us and said, "The man who came to my door on my birthday was most likely Eric Voss. He was a private investigator." The true threat paid to locate family members who could lead back to Isabel. She'd been observing our family for years, attempting to safeguard us without identifying herself or drawing attention to ourselves. She showed me photographs from her phone of a man in his 40s with grey hair outside my apartment complex. "That was Eric," she explained, "and he'd been following me for weeks before my birthday, learning my schedule." I left the cemetery and drove straight to my mother's house, my hands shaking so violently that I could hardly grip the steering wheel. Throughout the drive, I kept thinking about my sister, how she died for nothing, for someone else's past. When I arrived and knocked on the door, Mum answered it, saw my face and understood immediately. I held up the photo Margot gave me and saw her face turn absolutely white. "Where did she get it?" she muttered, and I pushed past her into the home. When I informed her I knew everything about Isabel, she burst into tears and begged me to keep it buried. She continued repeating that it was best if I didn't know, because knowing would only make things worse for everyone. But I wasn't going to go without answers, especially after my sister died as a result of her secrets. Mum finally sat down at the kitchen table and informed me that at the age of 27, she testified against a very dangerous man. She was the only witness willing to speak out after he killed 3 people, including her roommate. Her evidence landed him in prison for life, and he swore in court that he'd kill her, not just her but any children she had, and that he'd wait until they were 27, the same age she was when she betrayed him. When I inquired for his name, she shook her head and took a piece of paper from the drawer. She jotted something down with a trembling hand, presented it to me for 2 seconds, and then burnt it over the sink. She said that saying his name aloud might bring him closer, as if he had people listening everywhere. She believed that changing her name and relocating across the nation would be enough to keep us safe from him. She had been so careful for so many years, never uploading images online, never using social media, and always paying in cash. But they found us, and as a result, my sister died. When I asked about the family deaths, I realised why Great Aunt Agnes was so afraid. She was aware of Mom's true identity and Isabel's situation, which made her a target as well. All of Isabel's relatives, who died at the age of 27, understood the truth about her whereabouts. Throughout the years, someone had been ruthlessly removing anyone who could betray Mom's new identity and whereabouts. Margot arrived at the house an hour later with a folder full of newspaper cutouts from the previous trial. The headlines from 2003 discussed a terrible triple murder and the brave young woman who testified. My mother testified against a man who had been convicted of many murders, but was released on a technicality after 19 years. Some evidence had been mishandled, and his pricey lawyers found a way to have it all thrown out. He stepped out of prison 6 years ago, with his riches intact, and began his revenge plan right away. Margot said that he had been using his fortune to employ people such as Eric Voss to search out everyone involved in the trial. They discover family members, stalk them, learn about their offspring, and wait for the right time to strike. Our family's deaths were not coincidental or accidental. They were targeted hits designed to appear natural. The automobile that jumped the curb as I was walking to work. My sister died due to a brain aneurysm. Everything was planned. Mum broke down totally and said she had been receiving threatening texts for months before my sister died. Anonymous communications include old images of her as Isabel. Text messages from random numbers claimed to know where she lived. She reasoned that if she ignored them and did not engage, they would eventually give up and move on to someone else. She never dreamed they'd come after us children. She assumed the threats were meant to scare her into running again, but she was mistaken, and now my sister had died, and I was also meant to be dead. My entire body shook as I stood in Mum's kitchen. watching her cry at the table. I wanted to yell at her for keeping this hidden, for not warning us, and for allowing my sister to roam around unaware that she was in danger. My fists were clenched so tightly that my nails dug into my hands. Margot must have noticed how upset I was because she went between us and placed her hand on my shoulder. She warned me that alerting us might have exacerbated the situation, as these people look for any indication that their targets are aware of them. Mum had consulted a security expert years ago who advised her to act normally. She kept the threats a secret. The expert stated that if she informed us youngsters, we may fear or do anything that would alert them and cause them to strike more quickly. I pushed past Margot and snatched Mum's laptop off the counter. My fingers rushed across the keyboard as I went into my sister's Facebook account, using the password she had given me years ago. Margot looked over my shoulder as I scanned through her communications from the weeks preceding her death. There it was in her communication requests. Someone named Luca Graves, who claimed to be studying our family history for a genealogy project. My sister had responded to him 4 weeks before her birthday, sending him images from our family reunions and informing him of where we lived and worked. The profile image was of a random old man, but Margot suspected it was Eric Voss using a phony account. She took out her laptop and began showing me website after website where our information was simply sitting there for anyone to purchase. Mum's address and the amount she paid for the house were recorded in property records. Our full names and birthdays were included on the voter registration form. Those dumb people finder websites had our phone numbers, email addresses, and even information on our relatives. Every time we updated our LinkedIn profiles or posted on Instagram, we were essentially creating a map to ourselves. Margot opened another folder on her computer, and my stomach sank. She had medical records from 3 additional families involved in the original trial. Families of young kids who died from unexpected brain bleeding or organ failure. The symptoms were identical to those experienced by my sister. There was this medicine that could cause brain bleeding if you had particular genes, and it degraded in the body. So quickly that standard toxicology testing would miss it, unless you knew exactly what to look for. My hand shook when I read about a girl in Ohio who fainted at her job, much like my sister. Another one in Texas died during her birthday supper. Margot had spent years tracking these deaths, gathering proof that they were not normal. We travelled to the police station that afternoon, bringing a box full of Margot's paperwork and printouts. The investigator listened to us for almost 15 minutes before raising his hand. He stated that there was little he could do without specific proof of murder, such as the actual drug in someone's system or footage of someone poisoning them. In terms of the law, all of this was a coincidence. He advised we hire private protection if we were genuinely concerned and consider moving somewhere else. Mum slapped her hand on his desk, announcing that she would no longer run. She'd been running for 24 years, changing her name and never staying in one location for long, until she met my father and decided to try for a regular life. She was weary of being afraid every time someone knocked on the door or a car passed by too slowly. But even as she spoke, I could see her hands quivering and her eyes red from grieving so much since my sister's death. Margot called from the parking lot, and 30 minutes later, we were seated in a coffee shop with Henrik Faulkner. He was an elderly man in a fine suit who specialised in stalking and witness protection cases. He took notes while we talked and said he'd start working on restraining orders immediately. However, he admitted that if someone was dedicated enough to kill people and make it appear natural, they were really simply bits of paper. A court order was not going to deter them. He instructed us to document everything, save every email and communication, and record any unusual encounters. That night my phone called from a blacklisted number. I almost didn't respond, but something made me pick up. For a few seconds, there was only breathing on the other end. A man's voice spoke 2 words before hanging up. Isabel's daughter. My entire body became frigid. They knew who I was now. The next morning, a van arrived and 2 men began placing cameras in every corner of Mum's home. We changed all of the locks to heavy-duty ones that could not be picked. The security company installed sensors on all windows and doors to inform us if anything opened. Despite all of this, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching us. Every car that slowed as it passed sent my heart racing. Every person walking their dog might be collecting information. Every delivery driver could be an undercover investigator. Henrik called again a week later with more awful news. He'd been looking into the finances and learned that the man who wanted us killed had been using cryptocurrencies to pay people like Eric Voss. The money went through so many digital wallets and transactions that it was nearly impossible to track. He'd learned from his blunders in prison and researched how to properly conceal his trail. There were no bank records to subpoena or paper trail to follow. The payments might come from anywhere in the world and be sent to anyone having a Bitcoin wallet. 4 days later, Mum invited me over and said she needed to show me something important. She led me to her bedroom closet and removed a pile of old sweaters to show a little safe that I'd never seen before. Her hands shook as she entered the combination and retrieved stacks of cash wrapped in rubber bands, maybe $40,000 in total. She'd been saving money for 19 years, $20 here, $50 there, always cash from grocery store purchases or online sales, prepared for the day she would have to run again. She shoved the piles toward me, telling me to take everything and leave before they found me. But I pushed back, saying I would not leave her alone to face this. Margot arrived the next morning with 3 banker's boxes that she had been keeping in a storage unit across town. She put photos on Mum's dining table, and looking at them made me sick, because Eric Voss was at the grocery store 2 blocks from our house, 4 weeks before my sister died. Another shot showed him at the coffee shop my sister frequented every morning before work. Margot had been following him for months, chronicling his movements and gathering evidence that he was stalking our family. But when she took everything to the police, they argued that images of people buying were not evidence of anything criminal. She pulled out more papers and showed us newspaper cutouts from 3 more families involved in the initial trial as witnesses or jurors. The Greaves family of Michigan lost their 27-year-old daughter to a sudden heart attack. Despite the fact that she was a marathon runner with no medical issues, the Petrois of Georgia lost their son in a freak accident at work when a shelf toppled on him on his 27th birthday. 2 families had already lost children, and Margot said at least 1 more family was currently being hunted. I located the Greaves family on social media and sent them a message introducing myself and asked if we could talk. The response came within an hour, and we scheduled a video conversation that afternoon, during which they informed me that they had hired Sentinel Protective Group, a company that specialised in stalker protection and used former FBI officers. They had been paying $10,000 a month for 3 years to have security inspect their house every day and accompany their remaining children to school and job. The father had to take out a second mortgage on their home, and the mother worked 3 jobs. But they believed it was worthwhile because their other children were still alive. Mom eventually sat down with me and Margot that night and told us everything about the trial she had avoided discussing for 24 years. Her roommate, Sophie Lauren, had been dating a man who appeared lovely at first, but became increasingly dominating over time. When Sophie attempted to break up with him, he came up at their flat with a knife. Mum was hiding in the bedroom closet and heard everything. Sophie pleading for her life, the sounds that still haunted her dreams. When the police arrived, she was the only witness willing to testify because everyone else was afraid of what his family may do. She spent 4 years under witness protection, living in various motels and safe homes, until deciding she couldn't do it longer and wanted to attempt living a normal life under a new name. Henrik called us the next day, stating he had discovered something in federal legislation that could help us, because proving a pattern of persistent harassment and threats over state boundaries would make it a federal felony that the FBI would have to look into. He set up a shared online folder where we began uploading everything, every strange phone conversation, every time we noticed someone observing the house, and every automobile that followed us for more than 2 blocks, creating a paper trail that could not be ignored. 3 days later, I opened my email to see a message with no subject line from an address that contained only random digits and letters. The message contained 12 images of me taken outside my apartment at various moments over the previous month. Me carrying groceries, reading my mail, leaving for work. And the text simply said 27 over and over, filling the entire screen. I shared it to Henrik, who said it was strong proof, but it also suggested they were stepping up their intimidation methods, and we needed to be more cautious. Margot had been conducting her own inquiry and discovered Eric Voss had used the name Merrick Univ to apply for a job at Quick Ship Delivery Service 8 months ago, the same firm that delivered goods to our neighbourhood every day. She'd followed him on his route and observed him slow down outside our houses, taking photos with his phone and determining when we were home and when we departed for work. We decided to confront him the following morning when he arrived for his shift at the delivery facility. Mum stayed in the car while Margot and I approached him as he loaded his truck. And Margot stated that we knew who he really was and what he was doing. He paused packing boxes and turned back with a peaceful smile on his face, as if he'd been expecting us. He said we couldn't prove anything, and even if we could, his employer was extremely patient and had plenty of time to wait for the proper opportunity. He informed us that we could watch our backs every second of the day, but that someday we'd make a mistake, become complacent, forget to check the locks, and they'd finish what they started. Margot was filming everything on her phone, but he didn't appear to mind. He just got into his truck and drove away, as if we were talking about the weather. That night, around 3 a.m, I heard glass cracking and hurried outside to discover my car window smashed, and a photo lying on the driver's seat. It was a photo of my sister's grave with fresh flowers on it. Flowers I hadn't placed there, and someone had written on the back that they could contact us whenever they wanted, that we were simply postponing the inevitable. Mom spent the next 4 hours on the phone with the United States, the Marshal Services attempting to reinstate witness protection. I sat next to her, listening to her voice grow increasingly distressed as they moved her from one office to another. She kept speaking about the threats in the photo and my sister's death, but they all said the same thing. If you leave the program voluntarily, you cannot return unless there is a new credible threat to your life that fits certain requirements. The guy on the phone said, "Harassment does not count, nor do vague threats. They needed proof that someone was really attempting to kill her right now, not only terrify her." Mum hung up and tossed the phone across the room, which cracked against the wall. Henrik advised we engage someone to help us figure out why they kept finding us. He knew Adrian Lent, a researcher who specialised in genealogy and finding missing persons. Adrian arrived at the house with 2 laptops and a stack of papers. After I contacted him that afternoon, while we watched, he spent 4 hours browsing our social media, public records, and data broker websites. Every time he discovered our information somewhere new, he'd show us the screen and explain how anyone with $50 could purchase our addresses, phone numbers, and relatives' names. He discovered our data in 12 distinct breaches involving companies we'd never heard of, credit monitoring services, grocery shop loyalty programs, and even my gym membership had all been compromised with our information sold online. Adrian kept digging and discovered something that made him stop typing. He opened a chart of all the family members who had died at the age of 27 and began drawing lines between them. Every single one had attended Mom's wedding, baby shower, or other occasion where they had heard her real name stated. Great Aunt Agnes had served as her maid of honour. Her late cousin had helped her move into her first flat. They were not random family members. They were the only ones who knew about Isabel. Henrik called us the next morning to say he had persuaded a court to sign a restraining order against Eric Voss. The cops proceeded to serve it at his flat, but it was absolutely empty, not simply because he had moved out, but as if no one had ever been there. The landlord stated that Eric had paid 8 months' rent and cash up front and had never caused any problems. The neighbours couldn't describe his appearance. Margot drove past his fictitious employment at the delivery firm, and they stated Merrick Uni hadn't shown up in 4 days, and they'd already recruited someone new. 3 weeks later, my neighbour came on my door and asked whether I knew the woman who had been inquiring about me. She went door to door with a clipboard, purporting to do a neighbourhood safety assessment. My neighbour thought it was strange that she continued asking specific questions about our family, and when we were normally home. Margot recognised the description from another case she'd worked on. She explained that these folks had a vast network with different investigators rotating through to ensure that no one became too acquainted. They'd utilised one person for a few weeks before moving on to someone new before anyone noticed. I decided I'd had enough of hiding and being terrified all the time. I wrote about everything that happened and shared it on Facebook, Twitter, and Reddit. I mentioned names, displayed images they had supplied, and included copies of their communications. I wanted everyone to know what was happening to us. Henrik contacted within an hour and told me to take it down. He warned that going public could make us more vulnerable or incite copycats seeking attention, but I refused. I was tired of being hunted in the dark. The post began to spread, and within a day, it had thousands of views. My phone was ringing with reporters asking to interview us. A local news station arrived at the house. Mum locked herself in a room and refused to come out. She kept thinking the attention would make things worse, but I figured being in the spotlight would protect us. If everyone was watching, they couldn't simply make us disappear. 4 days after the story went viral, I received a call from someone who claimed to be a federal prosecutor. At first, I assumed it was another reporter, but then they added things that were not in my posts. They were aware of the trial, which occurred 24 years ago, as well as the other families targeted. They had been putting up a RICO case against the man who wanted Mum killed, but they needed more evidence. Our scenario could be just what they needed to finally throw him away. We met with the prosecutor and 2 FBI agents in Henrik's office. They showed us files on this man dating back 34 years. He had been accused of dozens of crimes, but there was never adequate evidence. They stated if we cooperated with their inquiry, they might provide us federal protection. It wasn't complete witness protection, but agents would check on us on a regular basis and monitor our communications. We agreed immediately. The protection consisted of an agent driving by the residence twice a day and calling once a week to ensure everything was well. It was better than nothing, but I was still unable to sleep. Every car that slowed down prompted me to grab my phone. Every knock on the door sent my heart racing. A month later, I received an email from someone named Anna Kovac. She stated that she was the nurse who was with my sister when she died. She'd been thinking about it ever since, and something didn't seem right. My sister had reported feeling dizzy for several days before to the aneurysm. She also informed Anna that she kept noticing the same automobile following her to work. Anna said my sister was worried but tried to laugh it off. Anna asked if we could meet in person since she had something she needed to show us, but couldn't discuss over the phone. We met at a downtown coffee shop, and she kept looking around as if someone was watching. She removed a small cooler from her purse and pushed it over the table to me. Inside were 3 bottles labelled with my sister's name. She had saved blood samples from my sister against hospital policy because the whole situation felt improper to her. The hospital would fire her if they found out, but she couldn't shake the suspicion that something had happened to my sister. We transported the samples to a private lab that Margot was familiar with, one that wouldn't ask too many questions about their origin. The chain of custody had been disrupted, so it would not stand up in court, but we simply needed to know what happened. 3 weeks later, the results arrived, and I vomited when I read them. They discovered residues of a rare chemical that can cause aneurysms in people carrying particular genetic markers. The toxicologist stated that it was nearly impossible to detect unless you were specifically looking for it. It wasn't enough for a murder charge since we couldn't show how it got into her system, but we knew for certain that someone had poisoned my sister. The next day, I had myself tested and discovered that I had the exact same genetic marker as my sister. According to the doctor, if I had been exposed to this substance, I would have died as well. Margot claimed the only reason I survived my birthday was probably because Eric couldn't get close enough to drug me because the man at my door scared him away by being too forceful. My sister had not been as fortunate because she'd been communicating with him online, mistaking him for a family member. Margot began making phone calls, and within a week she had scheduled a meeting with other people whose families had been targeted by the same man throughout the years. There were 12 of us at the initial gathering, all survivors or family members of victims. One woman's brother died 12 years ago of a suspected heart attack at the age of 36. Another guy's father died in a car accident that the cops blamed on mechanical failure, but he had always suspected otherwise. We began gathering once a week to share information and watch out for one another. One of the survivors, a woman whose daughter had been killed 6 years before, told us how she had fought back. She hired a forensic accountant to investigate the man's accounts and discovered several shell companies he was using to hide money. She reported everything to the IRS and had several of his businesses audited. It didn't entirely stop him, but it cost him millions and hindered his progress for a while. She provided us the accountant's contact information and said he would assist us for free because he despised what this man had done. Mum was breaking apart from the stress, so I discovered a therapist that specialises in stalking victims. Mum cried for an hour during the first session, and I held her hand throughout. The therapist provided us safety strategies to follow, such as changing our routes, checking our vehicles for trackers, and establishing code phrases with trusted pals. She taught us breathing exercises for panic attacks and helped us understand that our constant worry was understandable given what we were going through. We started attending twice a week, and Mum gradually started sleeping more than 3 hours per night. Henrik called with awful news regarding the federal case. The witness who was scheduled to testify regarding the man's money laundering had vanished 4 days before the grand jury. His apartment was cleaned and his phone was disconnected. The prosecutor believed he had been either paid off or terrified into fleeing. According to Henrik, this demonstrated the man's continued reach despite the agent's surveillance. Without that witness, the RICO case was weakened, but not defeated. I registered for self-defense classes at a gym that Margot recommended. The instructor was a retired cop who had handled stalker cases and understood why I was there. I learned how to break holds, where to hit, to incapacitate someone, and how to use common things as weapons. I also obtained a license to carry pepper spray, although knowing that it would not discourage someone who was truly committed. Still, carrying it in my pocket made me feel less helpless when I needed to leave the house. We learned from the support group that Mum's former witness protection handler had retired to Florida 6 years ago. One of the other members knew someone who knew someone, so we obtained his phone number. When we called him, he recalled Mum right away and stated he'd been worried about her since she left the program. He couldn't formally help us because he was retired, but he agreed to meet with us off the record. We flew to Florida and met him at a beach bar where no one recognized us. He appeared older, but his eyes remained sharp and frequently scanned the room. He told us that the program had identified Mum's case as high risk even back then, but she insisted on leaving once the man was imprisoned. He offered us a crash course in appropriate disappearance, in case things grew worse. Burn all of your credit cards and only spend cash. Never use your actual name for anything. Cut off all communication with everyone from your previous life. No exceptions. Purchase a burner phone and replace it every week. Never stay in one place longer than a few days. Transform your appearance totally. Gaining or losing weight. Dye your hair. Wear varied styles of clothing. Delete all social media accounts and never share images any place. He made us practice the strategy, going over each step until we could do it instinctively. Mum memorised the list of documents we'd need, while I devised escape routes from our house, my workplace, and any other places we frequented regularly. We opened new bank accounts in Mum's maiden name and began hiding cash in various places. The handler suggested we might never have to run, but if we did, we'd only have 90 minutes before they discovered we'd left, and we needed to make the most of that hour. 4 days later, Margot called me at work with news that caused me to drop my coffee mug. Eric Voss was arrested in Nevada on narcotics charges after a traffic stop revealed meth in his car. The cops searched his person and discovered warrants in 3 other jurisdictions for fraud and assault. Margot stated that he would make bail, but it would take at least a week to process things. I drove directly to Mum's house and found her packing boxes in the living room. She'd already decided we should live together for safety reasons, and was packing up my old room to make way for my belongings. That weekend, I returned home with 2 suitcases and my laptop. We spent the following 4 days transforming the house into a fortress. Mum had already ordered security cameras online, which arrived in these massive boxes. I spent hours digging holes and running connections, while Mum programmed the system using her computer. We installed cameras in every corner of the house, pointing towards the driveway, backyard, and both side yards. The doorbell camera could see anyone who stepped up the front steps. We replaced all of the standard door locks with strong deadbolts that the locksmith claimed would require significant equipment to crack. The windows received special locks that prevented them from opening more than 4 inches. Mum wanted bars on the windows, but I told her it was too much. We did, however, install motion sensor lights throughout the yard. They were so sensitive that any cat passing through set them off. The alarm system cost $3,000, but Mum was no longer concerned about the money. Every room was outfitted with door and window sensors, glass break detectors, and panic buttons. The corporation provided us with these small key fobs that, if pressed 3 times, would contact the cops. Through the support group chat, we discovered that other families were doing the same thing. A family in Ohio spent $12,000 on security enhancements. Another family in Texas had relocated to a gated neighborhood with armed security. Everyone was discussing what worked and what did not. Someone suggested we pull money for shared resources, and within 3 days, 18 households had contributed. The fund assisted low-income families in purchasing security equipment. It also paid for a lawyer to provide us with legal guidance on restraining orders and self-defense laws. One mother utilized the money to relocate her family to a safer place after someone broke into their garage. A week after the fun began, I received an email from a journalist named Sophia Rinaldi. She'd been looking into the first trial for a documentary and discovered some alarming patterns. She wanted to meet in person, but only in a public setting. We met in a crowded coffee shop downtown, where she showed me a folder full with death certificates. 7 people who were due to testify at the initial trial died before taking the stand, including 3 automobile accidents, 2 suicides, 1 drowning, and 1 unsolved murder. The dates were scattered out over 3 years, but Sophia tied them all to the case. She had police reports indicating that detectives had doubts about every single death, but could not establish anything. One witness had contacted the cops the night before his death, claiming that someone was following him. Another had left a message stating that she was terrified, but did not specify what. Sophia had been following down family members of the deceased witnesses, and 3 of them informed her that their relatives had acknowledged receiving threats. She gave me printouts of earlier letters, the paper yellowed with age, all with the same message: be silent. Henrik was thrilled when I told him about Sophia's findings. He mentioned that it could help demonstrate a pattern of behaviour for our civil complaint. Within 3 days, he filed paperwork to sue the man for harassment, stalking, and intentional infliction of emotional distress. We knew the man had concealed his money in overseas accounts and shell businesses, so we wouldn't get a thing. But Henrik stated that the goal was to get everything on the legal record and force him to reply. The man's lawyers fought the lawsuit vigorously, submitting petition after motion to have it dismissed. They said we had no proof of a relationship between their client and current events, but the judge permitted it to proceed because of the pattern Sophia had documented. 4 weeks later, we had to take depositions. The man would appear by video from prison while his lawyer sat in the room with us. Mum hadn't seen him in over 24 years, and she was shaking when we entered the conference room. Henrik held her hand as the technician set up the video hookup. When the TV switched on and his face showed, Mum uttered a sound as if all the air had fled her body. He appeared older, yet his eyes were the same, cold and flat, like a shark. He looked straight at Mum through the camera and grinned a little. "Hello, Isabel," he said, and Mum began to cry. The lawyer objected, but the harm had been done. Mum could not stop shivering and had to leave the room twice, to vomit. But when she returned a 3rd time, something had changed. Her face was hard, and her hands remained solid. She looked at the television and declared she was no longer terrified. The deposition lasted 5 hours, and his lawyer tried to trip us up. But Mum answered every inquiry clearly, recounting threats from decades before and the horror she had lived with. When everything was ended, Mum informed Henrik that she wanted to go public with everything. She was done hiding and wanted everyone to know what this man had done. Sophia was overjoyed when we decided to help in her inquiry. She'd already interviewed 6 other families and gathered boxes of documentation. We spent 3 days in Sophia's workplace, sifting through everything, scanning old photos and paperwork. Mom filmed 8 hours of interviews, recounting the entire narrative from the start. 3 weeks later, Sophia's piece appeared on the main page of the Sunday paper. The title read, "Decades of Death: How One Man's Revenge Destroyed Multiple Families." It included images of all the victims, timelines illustrating the patterns, and quotes from 18 separate families. The online version contained documents and audio snippets. Within hours, it had thousands of shares. My phone started ringing incessantly, with reporters calling to follow up. 3 other families contacted Sophia after reading the article, claiming they had lost relatives in the same way. The FBI agent assigned to our case contacted the next morning, stating that the article provided them with the information they required. The publicity had brought forward 2 witnesses who had previously refused to speak. One had recordings of phone calls in which the man discussed having individuals killed. By that afternoon, federal investigators had arrested him on RICO charges that may result in life in prison. But Margot cautioned us that his network was still operational. Eric Voss had posted bail and vanished, likely warning others. The man had utilised dozens of people over the years, and they were still active. Some may seek vengeance for their boss's downfall. Others may be attempting to collect on jobs they've already been paid for. We couldn't let our security down just because the major threat was detained. The other families felt the same way, and our group chat was filled with people reporting strange behaviour. a family in Chicago reported that a van had been parked outside their home for 4 days straight. Henrik filed trial papers that morning and informed us that we would have to testify in 8 months. Mum's hands shook as she signed the witness paperwork, but she continued to write regardless. Following the newspaper piece, 44 more families joined the support group sessions, which were transferred from my living room to a community facility. We prepared flyers with warning signs to look for and distributed them at each meeting. Margot assisted us in filing for non-profit status in order to obtain money to assist families with security fees. I returned to my office work, but I parked in various locations each day and used the stairs instead of the elevator. My co-workers thought I was paranoid about checking under my car before getting in. But I didn't mind. Mom met someone named Jerome at the support group, whose wife had been murdered by her stalker 6 years earlier. They began drinking coffee after meetings, and I saw her smile for the first time since my sister's death. The federal prosecutor called every week with updates and indicated they had enough evidence to imprison him indefinitely. We all checked in on a daily basis for 4 months, sharing any unusual events we noted. Mum and Jerome went to dinner twice a week, and she even had him attend our security check meetings. The trial date was put back twice because his lawyers continued to file motions, but Henrik explained that this was common. I put 3 more cameras at Mum's house and showed her how to use pepper spray correctly. Our organisation grew to include 250 families, and we launched a website with services and emergency contacts. Local news published a follow-up report on how we were assisting people, and donations began to flow in. Mum told me that Jerome made her feel safe again, and I was glad she met someone who understood what we had been through. The trial finally began, and we sat in the courtroom watching them bring him in wearing shackles. Mum grasped my hand when he stared at us, but she didn't turn away this time. I testified for 4 hours on my birthday and what happened to my sister. Mum testified the next day, telling them everything about Isabel and her 24 years of fleeing. The jury took 2 days to return guilty verdicts on all charges. When the judge read life without parole, the man looked at Mum and mouthed, "Isabel," but she simply stared back without moving. We planned a tribute for my sister on what would have been her 29th birthday. This time the entire family came, and we finally told them the truth about the curse and what had happened. My aunts and uncles cried when they learned how my sister died and why we kept it a secret. We planted a tree in the park with a plaque bearing her name and date. Eric Voss was arrested 3 weeks after the trial for attempting to intimidate another witness. They placed him in the same jail as his boss while he awaited his own trial. 4 days later, the guard discovered him hanging in his cell with a bedsheet wrapped around his neck. Margot said that someone killed him to keep him quiet about the network, but the cops ruled it a suicide. Another guy from the network was apprehended in Texas while attempting to threaten one of the other families. Our support group continued to meet every week, with more people joining as word spread. Mum moved in with Jerome after 8 months and sold the house that had so many painful memories. I helped her pack my sister's room, and we gave her clothes to charity. We retained her, jewellery and photos, but got rid of anything else that was too painful to view. My employment allowed me to work from home 3 days per week, so I didn't have to worry about my commute as much. I continued to check mirrors and look over my shoulder, but the terror was less intense. Mum and Jerome got engaged on the 2-year anniversary of the trial's conclusion. Life was not normal, and it never would be, but we were creating something better from what was left. Mum and I spoke every day and attended therapy together once a month. We established a scholarship in my sister's name for nursing students because that is what she desired to do. The organisation assisted 60 families in obtaining restraining orders and connecting them with security agencies. 3 more members from his network were detained as they attempted to collect on old jobs. I dated someone for a few months but couldn't deal with the stress of introducing someone new into this turmoil. Mum understood and told me there was no need to move forward faster than I was ready. Every month we went to my sister's cemetery and informed her about our lives and how things were going. The fear will always be present, but we learn to live with it rather than let it dictate everything. Mum smiled more and occasionally laughed at Jerome's poor jokes. We were closer than we'd ever been before, united by survival and the promise to keep living for my sister. That's it for today. Thanks for watching. Like and subscribe if you enjoyed the video.